Hey there, this is Jasper.
And this is Phineas.
And here's a quick update before you're going to listen to the first episode of Witches of the Patch.
Which is an update we're making first to introduce you to the title, because we didn't have the title when we started recording this thing. And second is that we are talking about a game developer in this podcast. We don't have the most positive outlook on his work, but we wanted to mention that for most of the podcast, what we're talking about is stuff that is about like 6 to 4 years old, so please keep that in mind. And also that the same developer is working on a new game right now at the moment, and this game is apparently better, or is going to be better than what he did before. So we will probably leave links in the description, so if you're interested in that, you can check that out for yourself.
However, our criticisms still hold valid, because we still look at it from the perspective of these games that we have actually experienced. But we want to be fair and give this context for you before you enter this podcast.
This is basically just us trying to be balanced. And
trying to be fair.
Trying to be fair, yeah.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for listening, and enjoy the first episode of Witches of the Patch.
See you!
Hello.
I'm Jasper.
And I'm Phineas.
And today we're going to talk about something that we have recently had on our mind, which might be interesting for some people who have been to my old YouTube stuff, because back then when I was a wee lad, I did like videos. They were not good.
I mean, they were okay, but you could say that what we are going to talk about is like a ghost from the past that haunts us to this day. We are going to talk about the German RPG maker, creator, game developer, Kelven, and some of his games. And the reason why we're doing this is that we were rewatching or reliving some of the old videos or reviews on Jasper's YouTube channel.
Yeah, you recently rewatched a lot of them.
I recently rewatched a lot of them, yeah. And
why would you do this to yourself?
Because they're still fun. But what we actually wanted to do is kinda take another look on these old videos, on these old games, see if some of our criticisms are still valid in that regard, and maybe try to re-experience these games without actually playing them again.
Because I don't actually want to re-experience them, because, well, to be fair, if I had to do games like these, I would have struggled. I would struggle, like, hard to even get to this level of coding when it comes to the RPG Maker, but
I think what would be important is to kinda
give a little bit of context, right?
Give a little bit of context, probably about Kelven, maybe a little bit about the RPG Maker scene in Germany.
Yeah, specifically in Germany. Because, just for context, we're talking about a specific group of hobby game developers that use a specific type of engine that is called the RPG Maker. As the name suggests, it's mainly built to make RPGs, but...
Well, pixel RPGs, like in the style of 16-bit games, specifically before there were expansions for it and newer versions of the RPG Maker that allows you to do a little bit more with it. So this is basically an engine that got popular in Germany in 2002 because someone else was basically
it was pirated.
It was pirated and then it was pirated, translated, and then redistributed. So that's kind of a funny story. That's also one of the reasons why many of the games that people released back in the day are not actually on any sites anymore, because people had to like pull them for copyright reasons.
Yeah, because they had like copyright protected music on it and sprites from other games and whatnot.
But also, it was made with a pirated engine. And that specifically made any assets that the engine had also pirated. So, and I think one of the first creators that got actually really popular, or I don't remember his name anymore, it's also not that important, but he made a game called Vampire's Dawn.
Oh god, Vampire's Dawn.
And that was like one of the first really, really popular RPG Maker games in Germany.
Yeah.
And that kind of caused a lot of people to jump on the hype, including Kelven.
Yeah. I'm just gonna throw in this real quick, like, back then, I was not yet, like, familiar with the RPG Maker. I kind of knew what it was. I just didn't have, like, the interest in it. So I was already familiar with, like, stuff like Vampire's Dawn. I was also familiar with, what's it called again? Alex?
Der Alex, der Weltenretter?
Ja! Alex der Weltenretter, genau.
Yeah. That was a parody game made by Kelven, actually.
It was made by Kelven?
Yeah.
That was made by Kelven? Oh my god!
So, but to give some context about how popular the RPG Maker and RPG Maker games were from 2002 on, I think I jumped on the boat in 2004 or something. There was like a gaming magazine that had like game demos on it and some mini games, and they actually put RPG Maker games onto this CD.
Yeah, I remember that.
For people, so these games were actually kind of published during that time.
Yeah, they were like professionally, quote unquote, professionally published next to like game demos of professional games.
Yeah, so that's how popular the RPG Maker as an engine was, and that's how big the scene was actually, and how seriously the scene was basically taken by gaming magazines. And
or like the gaming community in general.
The gaming community in general, yeah, it was a really big thing. It's not as big anymore as it was back then, but
it's still alive. It's still a very living, thriving community.
I mean, the RPG Maker is like a very, let's say, approachable engine if you want to make a game. So it's not too hard to familiarize yourself with it than other game engines, for example. Yeah, but this is also like how I actually got my introduction to Kelven, because one of his games, Desert Nightmare, was actually published in that magazine.
Yeah, and this is also very interesting because I dipped my toe into like other parts of the community, as in I dipped my toe a little bit into the Japanese community. I looked a little bit into the American community, mainly on Tumblr, of course, not on like the American forums and whatnot, but specifically in the American spheres, Desert Nightmare seems to resonate there. And I think that is because while there's like this huge subgenre in RPG Maker games that is specifically catered towards the theme of horror.
I mean, I wouldn't call it like a subgenre in RPG Maker games, because horror is just a genre.
Yeah.
So of course you will also take an engine like the RPG Maker to create
make horror games.
Games, and then you have to think about how effective that can be. But as we've seen with a lot of Japanese RPG Maker games, the horror can be rather effective, even though today it might be silly. I mean, I remember everyone being completely freaked out about a game like Aooni. Like, like, and everyone and their grandmother were playing it.
Yeah, everyone was shitting their pants over it, and you were sitting there like, what?
I mean, it was creepy. It was creepy in some regards, and it was able to build some atmosphere. And you can say the same thing about Desert Nightmare. It was also able to build some atmosphere.
That's true.
And I think, like, it also, like you said, it had an English release.
Yeah.
So English Let's Players were also playing it. I think, if I remember correctly, I think Markiplier played it at some point, way back.
Oh yeah, that was like...
Before he got really big.
Yeah, way before he got really big. That was like ages ago. That was like when he was still playing Amnesia mods and whatnot.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people who... Like, I know that a lot of players who started with Amnesia mods and also played horror RPG Maker games at the regularly, so... Yeah, but with Kelven, it's like... Kelven made a lot of games. He made horror games, he made fantasy games, but his main genre is horror.
Yeah, his main claim to fame would be his horror games, if you would ask me.
Yeah, so, and I think all his horror games, or most of his horror games, are very much Silent Hill inspired. He, like, made a game called Calm Falls. Calm Falls 2, I know that Calm Falls 1 was made by someone else, but Kelven made a remake for Calm Falls 1.
And called it Calm Falls 2, which...
it was called, the remake was in recent years, and it was called Calm Falls, and he, like, I think the original creator was allowing that, and that was basically just updated graphics and graphics.
Oh yeah, I remember that.
I think one of our friends played it in a stream.
Yeah, and we played Calm Falls 2.
No, we didn't play Calm Falls 2.
Did we?
No, we didn't.
No,
we didn't.
Okay.
We didn't. Yeah, but he did games. He did, like, his most popular games, I would say, were Desert Nightmare, which was interesting because it was like, I don't know,
a horror game that plays in a desert.
In a desert, mostly during the daylight, and I think it was strongly inspired by stuff like The Hills Have Eyes. So, and then you have Calm Falls 2, which is like a Silent Hill inspired horror game, and yeah. Then you have other games.
And then you have other games! Yeah, Calm Falls 2 and Desert Nightmare. Those are basically like his two most popular and most well-known games. And at the same time, they are probably also his best ones.
They're probably like two of the better games he has, yeah. Which is kinda sad because the problem with Kelven is, and this is one of the reasons why we eventually like started to get into him more, is that he didn't really develop, that he didn't really consider to change things in how he writes. Like, he is competent as a game developer, his games work most of the time, and the games in most cases are also not completely ugly, but he's not the best writer.
Yeah, and that is when I started getting into the RPG Maker community myself as like an actual creator that was interested in making a game. The German community was, in my opinion, very much stuck in the past, but not like from a technical point of view. There were other entries of the RPG Maker engine that are far more technically advanced, of course, than the one that was pirated in the early 2000s. And these engines were also a lot more popular, of course, with the community back then, because they made a lot of things easier. There were more assets to work with, there were more codes available that you could use. But the problem was, from a perspective of like writing and creativity, people were very much still looking after games like Vampire's Dawn, Desert Nightmare.
I think like Vampire's Dawn specifically, and also Unterwegs in Düsterburg.
Oh god, that one!
But I also know that people were looking at games like Velzabor, and I forgot how the creator is called. But it's the one that a while ago, I think last year or 2 years ago, released Crosscode.
Oh, you mean Laxen?
Laxen, right. You had already at that point, some very talented people in the community, but they were kinda overshadowed by people like the Vampire's Dawn creator or Kelven, because they would release games a lot more regularly.
Yeah, that's kind of the problem. You had on one side developers that would work on one project over and over and over and over and over again, remaking it over and over again, or just focus on this one project to make it like actually really good and working. And on the other side, you had people like Kelven, who were pumping out games on like a conveyor belt. Like, it doesn't matter if it's like interesting or if it's like fun to play or if I had any deeper thoughts put into this game. I just want to release a game because I have fun developing.
Yeah, I mean, the problem with Kelven's games is, I mean, yeah, he obviously has fun developing, but the problem is that he doesn't really think about the deeper implications of his games, and they're mostly like, thing happens, then another thing happens, then another thing happens, and they're not really fun to play. Like, stuff that is important for the gameplay, like riddles in the game or combat in the game, being like embedded into the actual world of the game, feeling like a part of the game, enhancing the experience. This is something that Kelven stopped doing after a while. So when you look at something like Calm Falls 2, where the boss fights were actually kind of clever, like you had to come up with a strategy to defeat the bosses, in more recent games it is just they run around and you hit them and then they die.
Yeah, or sometimes they just charge up a little bit, run up at you, and you just have to stand on the other side of the room, avoid them, and wait for like
and then
a minute or two until it is over.
Until it is over, yeah.
And like I said earlier, development-wise, this is fine. This is something that you can definitely like do. The problem with what Kelven does is that it just doesn't feel like it fits into the games.
The thing is also, I would say, he's overusing that. Like, if you have in a game like one or two boss fights that are like reliant on you moving out of the way for a time, I think that's fine. But if all the boss fights are like that, and none of the boss fights like require some sort of strategy or creativity, they're boring. And I think that's the problem, because we go into Kelven's newer games with the perspective of the older games that required a certain level of creativity to solve riddles and to get through boss fights. And of course, because they required this level of thinking and creativity, they felt more rewarding for the player. But if every boss fight is just you have to get out of the way so some weird deformed dog doesn't bite you, that's boring after a while. That doesn't feel really rewarding, especially like if the AI of that dog glitches out and he just runs like from one direction to the other without actually attacking you.
What we should probably also mention is that in recent years, at least, and this is also something that ties into this theme of Kelven not really like, I don't want to say emotional thought because that sounds really mean, like any storytelling thought into his games, is the fact that in the last 4 or 5 years, he has done nothing but remake his old games.
I think almost 6 years, if I look at when you put out your videos about him. So for almost 6 years, he has been like remaking old games. He has remade Desert Nightmare 2 times.
2 times!
He has remade Calm Falls 1 2 times. One time as like an actual RPG and one time as
a side-scroller.
Side-scroller, which was terrible.
Which was probably the worst game of his that we have played.
Yeah, because the combat was just not balanced. You were dying a lot. It was not great.
Yeah, we had to ask a friend of ours who's like a developer that uses the RPG Maker XP engine to make us a cheat.
Yeah,
because
so
we just couldn't finish the last boss fight and we just couldn't be bothered.
Yeah, it was frustrating, but I mean, he made new games, but in most cases they're not very interesting. They're very boring, and they're also like the same story over and over again. In most cases it's like a female protagonist. Nowadays it's mostly a female protagonist gets thrown into a strange place, situation. She doesn't know what it is. There are other characters, but they're not really important because they don't have personality. You kick some monsters in the butt and then the story is over at some point. That's basically what his games are, and this is what is so frustrating about his games, because there's no character development, and he openly has stated that he doesn't think that characters need to develop in a story, even though I think the emotional drama is much more interesting than any outside drama that could happen in a story. And it is also very obviously a lie when the characters in the end always spout some weirdly philosophical bullcrap about the experiences they just went through, and are like, oh no, my life has changed so much because of what I went through. And then you turn around and say, oh no, I actually don't think my characters need to develop. And another big problem with him is that he does not get out of tired old horror tropes, like sexual harassment, for example, or domestic abuse.
We will get into that in a little bit. Yeah, like you said, he has openly stated that he doesn't really care much about character writing, which back then more context. I entered like the German RPG Maker forums, which is basically the biggest place still where you can connect with other RPG Maker developers, specifically in Germany. And this community is rather old school when it comes to these things. And when you tried to like open up discussions about like anything that was in some way, shape, or form criticizing all of these tired old mannerisms that they had fallen into, and all of these tired old tropes, or if you dare to even like talk about the fact that some video games might have problems with sexism or something like that, then you were obviously just overreacting, and you were like a fucking idiot who's overreading into fun media stuff, because like, I don't know, 90% of the community were like mid-20, early 20 bro dudes at this point. I can only remember one female, or like two,
like, yeah, but I mean, Kelven is in his 40s.
Yeah, but he's definitely over 40 years old
Yeah,
now.
he's over 40 years old now. But I think a big problem with Kelven was that he didn't really care to, like, try to improve his writing, because, as I said, the characters don't have character development, and that made you as the player not connect with the characters. And I think with horror especially, it's important that you have some sort of connection to the characters, at least in the type of horror that he was creating, that you have like some connection to the characters, that you give a shit about what is going to happen to them.
Yeah, especially when you're playing that character.
Because you don't care if they die, you don't care if the supporting cast gets horribly murdered. And that's something you should care about. This fear is one of the parts where the horror comes from. And if you don't have a connection to anything, it's not as horrific. You're kinda just going through the game being bored.
Yeah, the thing that also was like part of this culture back then was that because Kelven was putting out so many games, and in his earlier years also very popular and good games, quotation mark, good games, he had a very high reputation in this community. Like, I don't remember if he was like an admin, but he was a mod for a while. I remember that.
He was a mod for the community.
Yeah.
For the forums.
And because of that, he was very, very active in the forums. Like, he was on there almost like every day.
Yeah, he was on there all the time, I feel like. He was active in most of the threads, talking to people, talking about his ideas. Like, a thing that is super funny about Kelven is that whenever he received any criticisms for his games, he would like open up
a new thread.
He would open up a new thread, being like, when he gets criticism about character development, he would open up a thread like, do you think that characters in games actually need development?
Yeah, like, he was so needy to have his opinion
validated,
that he would constantly open up new threads and be like, yeah, this is something that people have talked about in another thread right now. Please tell me that my opinion is the right one because I'm Kelven and I'm so great.
Yeah, and to be honest, but he also, outside of this community, got a lot of criticism. So people made videos about him, people talked about him, and he was also specifically, looking for a lot of these videos to, be offended at them or be people are harassing me by making videos about my games,
I'm not even sure, I remember I made, these old YouTube videos because I was so fucking mad at Kelven back then.
Yeah, you were.
I was so mad. I was really fucking upset at this guy because I had full-blown fights with Kelven in the forums. And honestly, while I had a lot of fun making these videos, I am not sure if he ever has actually seen these videos. Because shortly after I made these videos, I basically left the forums because I was just done with this whole community at this point. So I never really got a follow-up. The only thing I know is that it definitely made circles in the community because I've gotten YouTube comments from people who I recognized from the forums.
But I mean, it's possible because you were a smaller creator and you were also smaller in the forums that he actually never saw those videos and the criticism you voiced. I mean, we were also working on videos together, some of them, because I was actually actively playing Kelven's games a lot of the times.
Yeah.
And we streamed them for friends and we're frustrated together because that's kind of the only way you can get through these games is to be frustrated together.
And just finish them out of spite.
Yeah. Because a lot of the times they're not that much fun. The first Desert Nightmare remake it was an ordeal. It was an ordeal, and then the second Desert Nightmare remake was a little bit better. A little bit. Not much, but at least the riddles and shit were a little bit better. But I remember that Desert Nightmare RR, the second remake,
R squared.
That this Desert Nightmare specifically made me have an hysterical laughing attack when one of the characters got hurt, and then there's another character gets off a dirty rag to tend to his wound, and it's the few bacteria in this, they won't kill you, don't worry about it. And I was you're doing this to specifically keep the bacteria out, but okay, what the fuck are you doing? But this was basically...
Yeah, I remember this because we had to take a break because we were laughing so hard at this that we had to pause for 2 minutes.
I don't know if we had to pause because a lot of my laughing is in the video you made about that.
Yeah, because it was hilarious.
It was fucking hilarious, but this is the style of writing in his games, and he's not really well equipped to actually deal with the dark topics he's evoking in his games. Desert Nightmare has a subplot where one of the characters tries to basically sexually harass and later on rape
a minor,
the main character who's 16 years old.
Yeah, which is yikes.
And that's not dealt with very greatly because it's kind of yeah, but she's also leading him on a little bit. So that's not great. And then he came out with Urban Nightmare, and Urban Nightmare also has a remake.
Urban Nightmare.
And Urban Nightmare, the first version of the game was there's 4 people getting stuck in a young people punishment city, and the first version...
It's like Silent Hill but shitty.
It's like Silent Hill but shitty, and the first version of the game had basically one of the characters got punished because she was bullied in school and then shoved her main bully down a flight of stairs. One of them was hitting his girlfriend or wife. One of them was stealing
test
results with his friend and kinda left his friend to be punished alone.
Yeah,
and the last one.
The last one was a girl getting punished because she was babysitting a toddler or her niece or something, and she set her onto a tree, and then the telephone
telephone rang, and this is like trigger warning for child death. But she was punished because the kid fell off of the tree because she went inside and didn't look after the kid.
Yeah,
the kid
because
died.
she had to answer the phone!
Yeah, why would you do that? Why would you not take the kid with you?
Yeah!
But this is all this, like, except for the dude who
beat his wife
and the girl who, like, let her niece die. Except for those two, those deserve to be punished. But he later on changed the plot. And the characters, you still had these 4 characters, and now the main character was the bully, basically, and one of the characters being stuck in that city was the person she bullied, and there's this constant message about, oh no, why won't the person that got bullied not help her? She should just forget about all of this. She's doing all of the mental pain she got through the bullying. She's inflicting this on herself because she can't let go. And the other 2 characters are the dude who beat his girlfriend and the girlfriend is basically punished because she's too weak to just leave him, which is kind of like...
Yeah, it's kind of weird. Basically, people are put into a place where they should be punished for their sins, but the sin that some people have committed is being victims of abuse.
Yeah.
Like, this sends out so many weird vibes. It makes you think that if you are in a similar situation, like you were being abused by your spouse, or just you were being bullied by another person, and suddenly both you and your abuser end up in a place that is meant to punish you for going through this situation. You would sit there and think to yourself, why am I here? Why am I suddenly the problem?
I mean, this is kind of the backwards logic, because abuse victims think of themselves as the problem. They constantly ask themselves, what are they doing wrong? What are they doing to provoke this abuse? And the thing is, if that would have been the message, and the messaging would have been that they find out that they're indeed not the problem, that they don't deserve that abuse, that would have been fine, but that's not the message. The message is they need to be stronger because they're victimizing themselves, and that's like a shitty message. But the thing is, it's a difficult topic to write about, it's a difficult topic to put into a game and tell in
a very graceful and
a respectful manner.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Kelven is just not equipped for that. He's not, that sounds really mean, but he's not emotionally equipped for that. He's not intellectually equipped for that, and he's most certainly not equipped for that from a writer's perspective, because even if he tried to tackle these topics, even if he tried to tackle these problems, it would still be in some way or form entertaining, if it was in any way, shape or form entertaining, but it isn't.
I mean, the games are boring, but I don't know if they would be entertaining if he's not able to handle these topics in a respectful manner. And the thing is also, he doesn't really do a lot of research about these topics.
You mean no research?
I mean, he does some research, and the research is articles that are 10 years old that he has read at some point, because I remember...
Or watching movies.
Or watching some movies, so he's not really equipped for that, and that, I think, these were like the main problems, like his game was boring, and then that the game had, like the games had these very deeply problematic messages. Those were like the main problems we had with his games, and why we talked about them, and why we kind of subjected ourselves to them over and over. And I think in the beginning, like, I was in the forums for a while too, but I left soon again because, I don't know, I didn't need that drama. But like in the beginning, we kind of thought that, hey, maybe we can give him criticism, maybe we can help him improve, but this is just not possible. So it also kind of like an example of people will make shit you dislike, people will make problematic shit, but if they're not willing to change that, there's not really anything you can do except for move on and find creators that actually create what you want to see.
This is basically one of the big lessons that we got out of this, because, like I said, I came into the community to learn how to make a game, and I left not knowing how to make a game. but I left knowing that there are creators out there that I have to avoid, because otherwise I spend half of my day ripping my hairs out of my head, because people are just, on one side, not able to take criticism, and on the other side, while they do acknowledge criticisms, they are not willing to work with these criticisms.
Yeah.
I can respect people who are like, okay, this is a criticism, I don't agree with this, but still, thank you for this. But I can't respect people who like take this criticism and are like, you criticize this and that, now I'm going to tell you why you're wrong.
Yeah, I mean, Kelven did this a lot. Like, he wrote a lot of very long rebuttals to the criticism he's gotten. And when he tried to implement criticism, he obviously hadn't understood why he was criticized or what the actual problem was, because in most cases he wasn't really able to address these things.
Yeah, or he just basically talked in circles.
Yeah, but at some point you just can't really work with something like that and you have to move on.
Took me longer than it did for you.
I mean, we still, like, played his games a lot.
Yeah, we were gone out of the servers for like a year when he released his new game, and we were like, oh god, we gotta play that shit.
I mean, we also played, like, some of his older games afterwards, because they were just pretty bad. And sometimes it can be, like, kind of cathartic to just play a game that's not good. Like, analyze what's wrong with it and make fun about this game. With your friends, like in a small circle, without actually hurting anyone outside that small circle.
It's just kind of sad that these games were made by this one single person that we keep coming back to.
Yeah, I mean, personally, I don't care about him that much anymore. I think it's interesting to look at him as a creator and at his games, basically as an example of what not to do, and maybe as an example of what can happen to you if you don't want to grow. I mean, in the end, when you're a creator, you don't really have to grow, like, because his games were not monetized, he was doing that for free, because he had fun with that, and that's okay. And if you're just in it to have fun, I guess you don't actually have to grow. But on the other hand, Kelven himself was not, like, shy when it came to dishing out criticisms towards other people. So I guess if you're in the business of dishing criticisms out, you should also be able to like take them.
Yeah, that was one of the things that Kelven was also very good at. Like, I agree with you on the aspect when it comes to like enjoying things that are bad just for the sake of it, and to give criticism to these things, vocal criticism, and also like naming names. I mean, this is why we haven't played a Kelven game in like 2 years, and we're still talking about him.
Sometimes, yeah, but I think it's also like, I mean, my main reason to still talk about him is because we were making these videos together and we were having a good time with our friends, and we kind of connected over his games, playing them
with other people,
and and having fun with other people. So that's, I think, something positive that can come out of that. On the other hand, yeah, you have this connection to other people while enjoying a thing that is bad, but we also have to recognize that, of course, these games are bad for us because that's our opinion, and not because that's an objective truth in the universe that these games are bad. I mean, I guess you could maybe make the argument if you look at the gameplay and you look at how the games are structured, but personally, no shade at anyone who's enjoying a game like that.
Yeah, and I think, technically speaking, that Kelven's games are fine. Like, they work, they are playable, which is something that you can't say for every RPG Maker game, unfortunately. Especially for the German community. Going by the technical quality, Kelven's games are still, like, up there.
I mean, no, to be honest, if you
I mean, by today's standard, they're, like, mid-tier.
If you compare his games to, like, RPG Maker games from all kinds of communities, also in the German community, he's somewhere in the middle, I would say, because there are a lot of people who work with the RPG Maker as an engine who do fantastic things with it, also in the German community.
True.
Sharon.
Sharon! Would you like to talk about your Lord and Savior?
No, will you cut that insider out?
No.
Oh, okay, so
Barrels.
we can give like the link to a demo of a game we actually like in the description of the video, probably. Charon by a friend of ours. It's a good game. But my actual point, the thing is, it is kinda sad, and I know I was just saying about it's subjective that we call these games bad, but it's kinda sad if the highest praise you can sing to these games is that they work and are not broken beyond comprehension. Because this should be the baseline for a game. The baseline, the minimum a game should reach is that it should be playable, that it should work. And I mean, some games, some Bethesda games manage to still be fun even if they're unplayable in some parts.
Yeah.
But I mean, they're still playable for the most parts. But a game should be playable. That should be the baseline. And if this is the highest praise you can sing to a game, that it technically functions somehow, that's pretty sad.
Yeah, okay. Fair point. Fair point. But I was also like still talking. I was talking a little bit out of my ass from my perspective of like back then, you know?
Yeah, I mean, but even back then.
Even back then there were like better games. There were like games from other communities there were like games from other communities that had so much more character, so much more charm, so much more thought and energy put into it. And these games were oftentimes made before or shortly after Kelven made his first games.
I mean, during that time when we were entering this community, there were a lot of really fantastic Japanese RPG Maker games already on the market. There were a lot of fantastic American RPG Maker games that you could play. And
was very popular back then.
Off was one of the games. Eep,
yeah, Mad Father.
Yeah, I mean, Mad Father is kinda...
Yeah, Mad Father's kinda But it's still better than a Kelven game.
It's still better than a Kelven game, but there's like there were a lot of games that were better, that were really good, and even during that time, it was still like too high of a praise to say, hey, your game functions.
Yeah.
I don't know, because there were better games, even at the time. And there are definitely better games now.
Yeah, it's basically a participation trophy.
It's I mean, something I would congratulate him for is that he never stopped.
Yeah.
That he kept working on games.
I mean, he is probably, like, one of the only OG developers that is still active in the community.
I mean, the Vampire's Dawn developer is also still active in the community, kind of, and
is he?
Yeah. I mean, last year or so, he fundraised, like, the third part of Vampire's Dawn.
I am out of the community for so long.
You don't want to know how much money he made, but he made a lot of money. He got a lot of money together by fundraising Vampire's Dawn 3.
Oh my god, my world is shaking. We will have a Vampire's Dawn 3!
I think a friend of ours played the demo before and talked about it.
Okay.
Yeah.
I must have suppressed that.
I mean, yeah, probably. But this is not about Vampire's Dawn. But I can tell you all about it later if you want to.
Yes.
Yeah, but there are still a lot of... I mean, I would also say Luxen is also one of the OG German developers.
I mean, yeah, but Luxen, like, upgraded. Luxen is now, like... He is a serious indie developer.
I mean, he has like...
His stuff is on Steam.
Yeah, I mean, Vampire's Dawn 3 is also going to be on Steam, probably. But no, there is a gaming studio, an indie gaming studio behind the games that Luxen makes now, so...
Yeah.
Which is cool, because I really liked Luxen and his games back in the day. I really liked Velsaborn. I was sad when he, like, announced that he would not keep working on it. But it's nice that he's still, like, doing games and that he's also successful with doing games. So that's pretty cool. But you can still congratulate Kelven for still being here, even though he's really not as successful as some of these other people. I mean, I think the person who made Unterwegs in Düsterburg is also still active and is actually working, like, on a remake of Unterwegs in Düsterburg.
Well, that's at least something.
So, like, people are still like, oh, okay, maybe this isn't even, like, high praise you can sing to them. This is sad.
It's so sad. We desperately want to say something something nice about Kelven, and we can't.
Yes, it's like you want to say a positive thing.
The thing is, we don't even know him personally. We just know him from our experiences from the forums, and all of our experiences with him were negative.
Yeah, which is on the other hand, I can't look at that anymore, but some of it could also be that we were just stupid younger people. Because a lot of it is 5 or 6 years ago, so...
Yeah.
I mean, we were not younglings, but we were younger.
We were younger, we were still fledgling with our own creative endeavors.
I mean, I'm thinking about, some of the stupid bullshit I said in some of the videos we made about Kelven. Which is no, it's not stupid and it's also not untrue, but I think the point could have been brought across a little bit better, a little bit more coherently than I did back then.
Yeah, honestly, that's also a criticism I have for my old videos. I could have looked at it through a few more facets. I could have looked at it a little less angry.
I mean, the thing is, at that time you had conflicts with Kelven, and of course you were angry, and you would have looked at it not from a more neutral point of view, because you're actually actively connected with that person. And of course you will look at this with a bias if there is a connection to that person there. Which is why I said we could replay one of the games, or remake one of the videos.
I refuse.
Okay.
I mean, remaking one of the videos? Maybe one day, maybe. But I'm not going to replay any of these games.
Okay, then get one of the videos or the one that you want to remake, and we will remake it together.
Only if this podcast gets at least 100 likes.
You only say this because it's not going to happen. If this podcast gets at least 50 likes. Okay. 50 likes.
Okay, 50. Okay, let's settle for 50.
Okay, I mean, nobody's probably interested in a remake of an old video just in English, but if this gets 50 likes, we will do it, and you have to work hard to make a nice video out of it.
Okay, and I don't have the footage anymore.
I mean, I can replay the game and you can watch me. And then you don't have to suffer as much.
I can stream it.
You can stream it, yeah, that's also a good idea. Okay, so I think we are getting to an end, I would say.
Yeah.
At parts we were maybe a little incoherent, but that's mostly because
we're still trying to find our voices, trying to find our mood, our niche.
Yeah, I mean, and if you start to talk about something you haven't talked in a while, you will start to ramble and babble a little bit.
But I think that could kind of be the charm of it. Just picking a theme and just going with it.
Yeah, I hope. I mean, this is a very niche topic, and I know that a lot of people will probably not be super interested in it, but I hope it was still kind of entertaining, at least kind of.
Listening to two old men gossip about RPG Maker games in the good old days and have shitty graphics and ambulances with 6 wheels.
Ambulances with 6. Oh god, you have to put a picture in there.
I will.
Okay, so thanks for listening. I hope we will do this on the regular now, and I hope you're having a good time, and we'll see you in the next episode of whatever this is going to be called in the end.
Take care. Have a good day.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.